Hi, everyone, and thanks so much for being here at our Ask Microsoft Anything about the Azure AD rename. And we've gathered the experts to answer your questions, both in the chat and live. I'm Nicole Peterson, Senior Product Marketing Manager for Microsoft Entra, and I'd love to introduce you to my colleagues. So we have here in the chat and live with you, Ada Ivanov, who is the Principal Engineering Manager for Microsoft Entra. We have Christina Hotz, who is our Principal Product Manager, also working on Microsoft Entra and the Microsoft Entra Admin Center. Mohit has been my co-leader of the Azure AD renaming, as you're here for today. And Irina Necheva is our General Manager of Product Marketing for Microsoft Entra. So producers, if you can start up the slides, we'll give you a quick recap of the rename news, and then we'll get into your questions. So Microsoft Entra was introduced over a year ago as the name for identity and access solutions for Microsoft Security. And at that time, we kept the name Azure AD as part of the Microsoft Entra family. Now, following the expansion of the portfolio, we have 8 different products under the Microsoft Entra family. We're trying to clarify those offerings, and so we're renaming Azure Active Directory as Microsoft Entra ID. Next slide, please. So considering how far-reaching and critical Azure AD is, hey, Jerry, can we hit to the next slide? Oh, nope, that's me going to the next slide. So you can tell it's live, just make sure. Okay, so we've got, considering how far-reaching and critical Azure AD is, we really wanted to take a thoughtful approach to how we change the name. Like, we all agreed here that the #1 priority is to make sure there's no interruption of service at any kind for the folks who are using it. So that means all configurations, integrations, portals, URLs, like they're all continuing to work as they do today. And much of the developer experience has already been on a migration path to Microsoft Graph and also using the Microsoft Identity Platform. So there's no changes to the functionality with Microsoft Graph PowerShell or Active Directory, ADFS, domain services, or Azure AD B2C. And of course, all the licensing details also remain the same. Just as a quick recap here again, the licensing details. So what you knew before perhaps as Azure AD P1 becomes Microsoft Entra ID P1. P2 becomes P2. So it's a really straightforward, same features, same functionality. If you have the license today, you continue to have it in the future, just with a different name. Our naming itself, the product name is changed to Microsoft Entra ID, but all features within the service, whether it's from Microsoft Entra Permissions Management, Microsoft Entra ID Governance, or Microsoft Entra ID, they're all features of Microsoft Entra. So you'll have Microsoft Entra Conditional Access, you'll be working in a Microsoft Entra tenant, and we've added some of the other questions that we get commonly there, such as being Microsoft Entra Hybrid Joined, but it's really just using Microsoft Entra as your one place for identity and network access. So we can go ahead and cut the slideshow now and get back to our panel and our questions. We're looking for your questions if you answer them in chat. This is awesome. Thank you. Ryan, our first question coming up. Ryan says, I know there have been some negative reactions in the community about this change, but I think it makes sense. In my view, Azure Active Directory is really neither Azure nor Active Directory, so it makes sense to have its own brand. I'd be interested to hear from the team about what the main drivers were for making this change and why. So that's part 1, why making the change, and part 2, why choose Entra ID rather than, say, Entra Directory. Irina, can you go ahead and take this first question?
Absolutely, and thank you, Ryan, for feedback for the question. So starting with the why, for those of you who've been following Microsoft's identity business, you've probably seen last year that we expanded our solution. We introduced new products that were taking us very far away from the construct of directory itself, right? Like decentralized identity. And so last year, we introduced the new umbrella brand for all identity and access products, Microsoft Entra. And what we've seen in the last year is, of course, for most customers to start to adopt those products like Microsoft Entra Verified ID, permissions management, ID governance, it often happens together with Azure AD. And those products are very, very deeply interconnected. So as we were thinking into the future, as we were introducing products in the security service edge, it just made sense for us to take this step to unify. And we acknowledge that this change and transition may feel disruptive, but we also are convicted that in the future it will make it much easier, right? Because any tool that an organization may need to secure any access point will just be available in Microsoft Entra. Now a question on why ID rather than directory, identity. We have considered many options. Directory was one of the first ones to sort of not be an option for a couple of reasons, right? Directory, it still takes us very much into where identity started as the infrastructure solution that manages, right, user entries. And what modern cloud identity tools do is very different. It's very much about identity security. Our hero crown jewel feature is conditional access. So we thought that it would be important to reflect that in the name. And that's how we settled on identity, or short version of that, ID.
Thanks, Serena. All right, now we have a question that I'm going to pass to Christina. So question from Kent. Thank you for your question. Where can I find a list of all of the solutions and features being renamed to help understand whether the solutions will be Microsoft Entra ID or Microsoft Entra? And for example, specifically, what is Azure Active Directory Domain Services new name? Christina?
Hey, thanks for that question. Thanks for that question, Ken. So the best place to see the full list and all of the information that you need is this aka.ms WAC rename link, and all the details are there. Everything that you need is right there. And then in particular, for your question about when to use Entra, Microsoft Entra versus this, or are you referring to the product? So Microsoft Entra ID is our identity and access management solution. So whenever you're talking about Microsoft's product, that would be Microsoft Entra ID. IMD would be good use cases for that term. Then if you're looking at how you used to use Azure Active Directory, is kind of like an adjective. Azure Active Directory conditional access, Azure Active Directory joined. That's when you say Microsoft Entra joined or Microsoft Entra conditional access. It's really that adjective for the feature or service that you're referring to. And then as far as exceptions go, if something is called Active Directory, the name is still going to be Active Directory. So something like Active Directory Federation Services is still going to be called Active Directory Federation Services. Nicole, is there anything you'd like to add?
No, that's great. I think we also have an exception with Azure AD B2C. So Azure AD B2C will be keeping that name as well. Okay. Ooh, the green question from David. I'm not sure I understand this question. The green licensing line on the chat is not a straight path, but you mentioned licensing remains the same. What does the squiggle indicate? I'm not sure what the green squiggle is either. Maybe it's in the chat. But for licensing, what we're saying about licensing remaining the same is that Azure AD P1 still is Azure AD P1. The licensing and pricing of those features are all the same. I will go to, we did get some questions before the chat as well. And We've had questions about, hey, how come this isn't changed yet? Or when is this change actually happening? Mohit, can you walk us through the timeline of the changes?
Yeah, absolutely. So we announced the change on July 11th, as you know, and we wanted to give customers a little bit of time to sort of absorb the change so that it's not a big surprise. Give people time to like process and ask these kinds of questions. So we will start renaming Azure Active Directory across all our product experiences at Microsoft starting August 15th. And this will roll out throughout the second half of this year. So we're targeting towards the end of the year to have most of our changes complete. And this includes changes for documentation. So basically, our plan is to change the product and then simultaneously change external customer-facing documentation to ensure that there's no customer confusion on that front. We are also expecting certain experiences to take longer. So, you know, there are things like on-prem, there are graphics and docs, which might take a little bit longer. So we do expect this to be a slightly longer term change where you'll see certain experiences not changing until 2024.
Great. Okay, we have a question from Sarthak about, is Microsoft Graph being renamed to Entra Graph? And no, Microsoft Graph is Microsoft Graph. Ada, do you want to talk a little bit about those developer services?
Yeah, I was about to just plug in that we were very conscious about making any breaking changes. And from that standpoint, we are not changing any endpoints. We are not changing libraries. We are not changing any of the APIs that can cause grief to developers, to partners, and customers. So, and for Microsoft Graph, it is much more powerful than just identity. It allows you to access any of the capabilities across the various Microsoft products. So no, it's not changing.
Great, thanks. One of the other questions that we saw on social media yesterday is about, will I still be able to access Azure AD, now known as Microsoft Entra ID, in the Azure Portal? Christina, can you talk a little bit about the Azure Portal integration and the Microsoft Entra Admin Center?
Definitely. So last May, we introduced the Microsoft Entra Admin Center as the replacement for that old AAD Admin Center. So we really needed a home for Microsoft Entra permissions management and really to set that home for all of the new services and products that we're planning to bring to market. So we introduced that new admin center, and we hope that it becomes your home for all of your identity and network management tasks. And then at the same time, we fully realize and fully understand that Microsoft Entra ID offers core capabilities to Azure, and that you need to be able to access and manage those capabilities when you're doing things with Azure. So some trouble staying connected to the AMA. So I'll also kick it to Mohit to clarify anything that might have cut out as I was having some technical issues.
So yes, sorry, Christina. It looks like your video is stuttering a little bit, but no issues on that front. Yes, so the Microsoft Entra Admin Center is where we want you to be going. That said, the Azure Portal will continue to exist, and we do realize a lot of you do use that experience. So that will continue to have the functionality that you know and expect.
Great, thanks. So we have a question from Manny in the chat, whether we call it Entra ID for an end user account. You've got your Azure AD account for admins, but Irina, can you talk about what we call a user account?
Sure. And I'm assuming that when we say users, we mean all of the end users that currently you use Azure AD to be renamed to Microsoft Entra ID to secure their access, right? So what happens is today, right, for people who administer those identities, of course, you think about them as the Azure AD user accounts. For the end users, though, I think all of you know that they never get exposed to that name because they see it as an account for the organization, right? So if your company name, they see it as, oh, this is my account with that company. If you're an educational institution, they see it as like, oh, this is account for me to access my school applications and resources. And to that end, for the end user, in a way that they interact with our service, nothing changes. They will continue to see beautiful branded experiences of your organization or your school, right, or your company. And we continue to make those sign-in experiences better. But when you think about how you administer those end user accounts, they would become Entra ID, right? So same as all of the other capabilities, those would be renamed to Entra ID. So administrators will see the new name. For end users, nothing will change, only those branded sign-in experiences will continue to get better and better.
Great, thanks. All right, we have a question from David, and I will pass this one to Atta. How will the transition from Azure AD to Microsoft Entra affect existing Microsoft Graph integrations?
So it should not, thank you for the question, David. It should not affect any of those integrations. In fact, in Microsoft Graph, there are no mentions of Azure AD, AAD, etc. So from that standpoint, all the APIs, endpoints, like everything continues working as before. And there was a video. We are going to share a YouTube link that is really going in depth, explaining these nuances. So, Nicole, if you can just paste that link, it would be super helpful to share.
Great. I will get on pasting that link, and we'll get to the next question. Question from Partham, thank you. What is the difference between Microsoft Entra ID and Microsoft ID governance? Irina, can you take this one?
Yes, absolutely. And thank you so much for the question, Partham. So those two are very complementary sets of capabilities within Microsoft Entra. But Microsoft Entra ID would include all of the capabilities that are currently bucketed by the industry and the market into the category of access management, while ID governance is the set of capabilities which are in the market category definition or identity governance. And the way we think about those two capabilities, they are highly complementary, right? So instead of having two different solutions, as has been common, especially in the on-premises world, where you would have, for example, Active Directory to manage access management, and you would have a different solution, for example, MIME to manage identity governance, or one of our partner organizations, right, like SailPoint to manage identity governance. We all seen that those two worlds are converging. It's much easier to have a solution that does both. And that's what we're delivering with Microsoft Entra, but to help you navigate different sets of capabilities, we're also making it distinct that Microsoft Entra ID is all of your access management, identity security, and Microsoft Entra ID governance is all of the identity governance capabilities.
Great. And Irina, the next person in the chat, we have a question about Microsoft Entra ID protection as part of the family. And another one is Azure Key Vault part of Microsoft Entra. So two other questions about the product family.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And thank you so much for the question. So starting with the ID protection, this is an evolution of the capabilities that you probably know today under Azure Active Directory Identity Protection. The hero capability there is risk-based conditional access, but we are adding more and more capabilities. So at our event last week, we introduced a new dashboard that shows all of the protection It also includes new capabilities like token protection, and will continue to add identity security capabilities. So think about ID protection as all of the advanced identity security in Microsoft Entra that can help prevent account compromise. For Azure Key Vault, right now, Azure Key Vault is a very targeted service that only works in Azure. And therefore, at this stage, we see it as a part of our broader identity portfolio, but not a part of Entra family, because the promise of Microsoft Entra is to deliver solutions that are multi-cloud, multi-platform, that work for any application. So as we're thinking to the future on how we secure access in a multi-cloud environment, we'll hopefully be able to share more soon. But at this time, Azure Key Vault remains as is.
Great. So another question that we received online ahead of time was about how partners, developers, or content creators should think about replacing AAD/Azure AD in their own content. Mohit, can you take that one?
Yeah, sure. So we understand this is work, right? Like this, we understand that we're asking you to do something that you don't necessarily need to do, but we want to try and make this as easy as possible. So what we are requesting teams to do is basically audit their experiences to find references to Azure Active Directory and the icon. And we've talked about no breaking changes. So prioritize highly visible customer-facing UI, and anything that could potentially cause a change, such as APIs, URLs, etc., are all out of scope. You don't really need to update anything on the older side or anything that you're potentially deprecating in the future. But if it's still popular and useful, then yes, it does make sense to go ahead and make the change. We leave that to you to make that call. And don't just do a find and replace, as the slide says. One of our big fears is breaking changes. So to avoid that, do this mindfully and kind of look at what changes you're making and ensure that product name is replaced by Microsoft Entra ID. So Azure Active Directory becomes Microsoft Entra ID. However, if it's Azure Active Directory feature name or Azure Active Directory capabilities such as conditional access or multi-factor authentication, etc., you replace it with Microsoft Entra. And for us within Microsoft, we're planning on starting to make the change starting August 15th through the end of 2023. But we encourage you to do the same. And so start around mid-August and try and get this done as soon as possible to ensure that our customers are not confused.
Great. And the URL for that is aka.ms/AAD rebrand FAQ. Great, thanks. And for the next question, we have about 2 minutes left. So one of the other things that we get asked is, hey, informally, I know a lot of you say AAD all the time, or you maybe put it into your code, AAD. It's a really easy, short way to say it. Irina, can you let people know what you should be saying if you're going to abbreviate Microsoft Entra ID?
Of course, and I have to preface that, of course, at Microsoft, we try to stay away from abbreviations, but we do acknowledge that that's impossible to completely eliminate. And for us, it was very interesting when we were looking at the name, and we did think about the abbreviation, that in this case, this abbreviation can be really cool as the Me ID. So something to consider as you're writing code, as you're thinking about how you can talk about our new name for the cloud identity solution.
That's great. And do we have time for one more question, or anyone on our panel have something to say? Anything else we want to talk about here? Oh, we have a question about when will the documentation change? Docs, Mohit. Oh, looks like we missed it.
Nicole, your voice broke up a little bit there.
Okay. Hey, we've got to wrap up actually. Next up is Prevent Identity Compromise with Microsoft Entra ID protection. So you get to learn about that next. We super appreciate all your questions. Thanks so much for all your engagement, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.